Let me just do a brief introduction. So we have a panel session with women in Web3, Web3 Women in Science. And the mission of Web3 Women in Science is to address the critical underrepresentation of women at the intersection of science and Web3, sometimes referred to as DeSci for decentralized science. So with the W3, WAS core tenants are serving as an efficient pipeline to onboard women into novel and existing DeSci organizations, and serving as the Web3 evolution of a labor union, providing the support needed to keep women in the space once they arrive. So with that said, I'll leave the floor to you.
All right. Well, as we wait to get Aaron on, I'll just do a brief introduction of myself, and thank you to all of ResearchHub for inviting us here to do this talk. We are very excited to be here. My name's Ariella. By day, I'm an MD PhD candidate at Washington University in St. Louis. I study, among other things, medicine and the genetics of aging. And I joined the decentralized science space about a year ago. I've always moonlighted as a science writer and illustrator, and I started doing that kind of work, same exact kind of work in the decentralized science space. And while there, I noticed that there was a lack of diversity. It's a pretty homogeneous community, and it was hard to find a lot of women, especially as speakers at conferences like these. And I thought it would be a good idea to start an organization to help recruit more women and support more women and amplify their voices. And, we all know that diverse teams are successful teams, and we all want as many people in this space as possible. So I think, these kinds of movements should be celebrated to make DeSci the most successful. And on that note, this topic of onboarding scientists is very near and dear to our hearts at Web3 Women in Science. It's what we want to do. And so I'm really pleased to take you through a whole panel today where we'll do a little whirlwind tour of 3 phases of onboarding and considerations for making the process as effective as possible, which of course involves being as inclusive as possible. So briefly, I just want everyone to recognize the faces that I have up here with me. There's Talissa. Talissa is a PhD candidate in microbiology. You also might know her on Twitter for running the account DeSci Chatter, where she sends us a lot of tweets all the time about events coming up and really keeps an eye on how the whole space is evolving, especially by following the DeSci hashtag. And she's also more recently become a DeSci World contributor and is working really hard on onboarding at that platform as well as at Web3 Women in Science. And next we'll talk to Kendall. And whereas with Talissa, we'll be focusing a lot on how to reach out to communities worldwide. Kendall, I'm very excited to have on a panel because a lot of times we're sitting here talking about how to onboard more scientists, and Kendall is actually my classmate who we are in the process of recruiting. And so we can ask a scientist who's about halfway through the process of being onboarded and recruited, how it's going so far, what factors are pulling her in or pushing her away, and what she wants to see for the future. Then finally, I'm very pleased to have Aaron. Aaron has a very extensive background as a serial entrepreneur at the intersection of community, technology, and startups. And currently she's operations lead at TalentDAO. TalentDAO is super dope because it's actually a DAO studying DAOs. It's very meta. And it's really important to have her perspective as an expert on what it takes to keep people engaged once they are recruited. So with those brief introductions, let's just dive in and start with Talissa. Let's talk about how DeSci is reaching people all over the world. So Talissa, do you think that existing scientific institutions are doing a good job of capturing the world's scientific potential?
Yeah, thank you, Ariel, for the introduction. I'm excited to be here with you all. I'll be upfront and say that I think that science has long been this activity that is elite, and it's dominated by the elite, and we uphold this history today through academia. It's often that science is not considered, good or credible unless it's tied to an investigator who is a part of or adjacent to the academic institution. So consequently, the good science that gets funded and published and put out into the world is biased towards these Eurocentric thought systems or towards major scientific monopolies or corporations that have buy-in, or, you know, old veteran generations of scientists who have accumulated all of this status within their fields over their tenure. Even simply just towards resources and literature that is exclusively published in the English language, right? You know, as Ariella said, I'm a PhD candidate myself. I've been a pawn of academia for quite some time now. And despite many of the privileges that I alone have, I still feel removed from the institution because I present as a woman of color, or because I don't come from a certain academic legacy, and, you know, because I resist assimilating into science academia. And so, you know, I do feel this disconnect in a place where science is apparently opportunistic and diverse. And so it's inevitable that this can be felt kind of more widespread, you know, across the globe in different pockets. So no, I don't think traditional science is doing its best to capture the world's full scientific potential.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And like super briefly, I lived in Japan for several years, and Japan is hardly, you know, a desert of scientific innovation. It's a highly developed country, but even there, just the lack of access to the English language, my job was to translate and, you know, write our papers for them. And you could see just how much extra burden there was to go to professional groups to have everything they've done translated and retranslated and edited. And it's a huge barrier. Even just the English language can be a huge barrier. So to move on, how do you think that DeSci might be able to address, you know, these pitfalls that you've mentioned in traditional science? And like, do you think that's already happening? Do you think we're already doing better in DeSci, or not quite yet?
So, you know, DeSci is really cool. It's new, and we're using it to focus in on using blockchain technology to restructure the actual systems of science. But, you know, technology aside, we're also essentially rebuilding the scientific community as we know it, right? And with that, there's this opportunity to shift the culture of science and what it means to be a scientist. I think it's important to leverage DeSci as a movement that will make participation and discovery of science accessible regardless of someone's educational background, language, socioeconomic status, age, because I don't necessarily think that that DeSci is going to replace traditional science in its entirety. So, you know, what if participation in DeSci essentially just trickles down to greater scientific literacy and critical engagement in traditional science? So, you know, I'll say that I don't think we're at this level yet where we can start like pushing forward into these higher level applications of DeSci, like on a cultural and societal standpoint. But I do think many of us have good intentions and we're trying to think about this, but it's going to take a real effort and challenge to break down what we already have come to recognize as the convention of science alone, but also Web3, which is yet another cis male dominated community with its own conventions and jargon and exclusionary barriers.
Sorry, after years on Zoom, you think I would have mastered unmuting. But so what concrete actions do you think are necessary to make DeSci more globally inclusive?
You know, despite the fact that we do have ways to go, the hopeful side of me is that it feels really attainable that we can do these things because we have members of the community that have good intentions to break down these barriers. And, you know, for example, we suddenly have this ability to participate in science asynchronously through Web3 platforms and like online collaborative communities like Twitter and Discord, despite what you think about them. These are just tools that are always available. And this alone opens up this whole new layer of participation that doesn't necessarily exist or is rarely validated in traditional science. You know, and so thought systems or ideas that are otherwise underrepresented or unavailable by way of traditional science are now being put into this very collaborative floor and, you know, broken out of their own echo chambers or et cetera. as you said, I am also part of the DeSci World Core team, so shameless plug, but we're super focused on building and facilitating a community that serves as sort of a gateway to everything you need to participate in DeSci. And we acknowledge that people are coming in from different backgrounds, from science natives to Web3 natives to people who are just interested and curious about either community. And so we're hoping to leverage the community itself to build around its needs. And I think that's something that should be adopted in various DeSci projects and communities, if not already. To be more concrete, we're focusing on endeavors like resource and document translation as a really basic one, peer-to-peer opportunities, open community participation and quorum, these endeavors are, of course, all with intention to foster participation from different backgrounds in science and in Web3.
Yeah, those are really great points that you bring up. I think in particular, the asynchronous communication, how it's socially acceptable to coordinate scientific endeavors now using Discord or other messaging apps. Whereas traditionally in academia, we're used to having meetings in person pre-pandemic and over Zoom, at least during the pandemic. Everything just sort of shifted to online, but remained otherwise the same. In fact, I think we have a lot of more meetings now somehow since people discovered Zoom. And so I think it's important for people building for the global community to keep in mind that if all of your events are on Eurocentric and America-centric time zones, that you might be reinforcing this kind of Eurocentric, America-centric narrative that exists in traditional science. And it might make more sense to try to build tools to keep everyone engaged as asynchronously as possible, where possible, or develop other methods to mitigate time zone issues, like having the same event staggered across a few time zones, making liberal use of recordings, and having liaisons, cross time zone liaisons. So I think those are really important points to bring up. I want to talk a little bit, now that we've discussed how to reach a global community, and Talissa brought up some excellent points about having resources available in native languages and recognizing people coming from different cultures. So now let's say that we have sent out information in an accessible language, in an accessible format. Is that enough? Let's move on to Kendall here. Is that enough? Just, the existing literature, you speak English and you're on our time zone, and you have, seen some materials that have come out explaining what decentralized science is. Is that enough to get you excited about it? What do you think is necessary after the phase of getting reached with the information? What is necessary to move from I've heard of this to I'm participating in this?
Yeah, thanks for the kind introduction and for the opportunity to speak. I would say initial reaching is an important step, of course, in garnering interest from a large audience, but there should be an emphasis on maintaining opportunities for engagement for people at multiple levels. So considering the accessibility of the platforms being used, if you're talking about from a cryptocurrency financial perspective, are there going to be investments required meeting people where they are in terms of price point? And really thinking about, especially for scientists, I think this community and this intellectual engagement piece. So identifying strengths that, I'm speaking as a scientist, so identifying strengths that scientists could bring to the table, what perspectives you can offer. So I'm not someone who has a building background or a software engineering background, but I really am enthusiastic about how can we leverage blockchain technologies to sort of push the boundaries of science and what we're capable of doing. So I think that's very important, is to identify, once you have a cohort of people, what are the strengths and what are projects that people like me could get engaged in.
Yeah, and so speaking of you specifically, just even though it's an N of 1, you as a scientist, what really clicked for you? What made you feel more interested in this space and stopped you from continuing to scroll to something else? What was important to you?
Yeah, so really feeling that starting out, my participation, my perspective was going to be valued. So initially I had sort of run into on Twitter different accounts related to blockchain technologies, different DAOs. All of these are very new concepts for me. And so this also speaks, I think, to the importance of the network effect. So thinking about who are you connected with? And I just so happened, as your classmate, to be connected to you on Twitter, and also following the Web3 Women in Science account. And so that was an important gateway. And I think there are positions for organizations to sort of collect people with common interests and help facilitate them in terms of here's a direction that you might want to pursue in terms of how can you apply your science background. And so then I became sort of a moderator on the Web3 Women in Science Discord, so joining all these different Discord communities. So that was sort of my initial entree, and what kept me here really is not only the potential of the blockchain technologies to be applied to specific scientific concepts, but the possibility of holding people accountable, not only in terms of the quality of the research that's being addressed. So how can we use, for example, a token system to reward people for putting in that time and effort that it takes to review a publication, which we all know takes, well, if you're in science, you know that a quality peer review takes a lot of time. So that's one metric of accountability that I think the space can offer, but also the accountability to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So how do we build from the ground up a community that reaches people from all different backgrounds, experiences, and global communities?
So I think what I'm hearing you say is that some of the failings in the traditional scientific institutions with accountability, both in research conduct or misconduct, as has been in the news a lot lately, and in issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, made you feel like you wanted to explore potential new paradigms, and then that brought you here. And then you also mentioned the network effect, and I just want to pull on that thread for 1 second before we move on to ask Erin some questions about engagement. So can you define for us what you feel is the network effect, and then why it might be important?
Yeah, so when I think about the network effect, I think about the tendency of a field to sort of push in the direction of the interests of a homogenous group of people who tend to be leading that field. And that is in large part determined by this network connectivity of the people who are advancing that particular field. And so that's important when we're thinking about building a DeSci space, because the people who are connected to each other and are then setting the agenda of a particular organization, we should be very conscious about who we sort of bring, whose perspectives we bring as we make organizationally defining decisions.
Yes, excellent. And so it was important to you to have somebody you felt you could relate to in the space. Was it important to have like a one-on-one buddy, or do you think just having people in general in the space that you could relate to, that you saw yourself in, was that the most important thing, or are they both important?
Both are important for different reasons. So the concept of someone who looks like me, has similar background and experience as me is one thing, but also just the one-on-one buddy situation. I mean, I think about the first time that Arielle and I were sitting in a bar and she, mentioned the Surge Women token was about to be minted. And so I minted an NFT in a bar for the first time. And so that one-on-one connection is also a buddy system, I think would be helpful as well.
Well, we'll do what we can to create enough buddy systems in Web3 Women in Science to get more of us. And hopefully, I love that I was able to recruit you being in my class, but hopefully together we'll come up with methods to extend that beyond just our immediate classmates. And I'm really looking forward to using university networks to do that. Erin, really happy to have you here today and talk with you. I feel that you are far more of an expert than me on this. You've been in this space for so long and are such a big name in community management and tech entrepreneurship. And I would just love to hear open-ended your thoughts on what it takes once people join an organization to keep them happy, engaged, coming back, and contributing in a meaningful way.
Absolutely. So
I think just building off of what Talissa and Kendall have said so far, there's a huge opportunity here, especially in the DeSci space, to really disrupt, in a sense, some of the different scientific systems and ways that the scientific community has operated basically since the beginning of time. And that can create different pathways for people to engage in those opportunities that may not have had the opportunity or invitation to do so at that level. With that, when creating those different pathways, really meeting people where they're at is an essential component. And that's tying into, okay, what is already existing currently? How can that be expanded or altered a teeny bit to then create just more invitation, more openness, more opportunities for feeling like somebody is allowed or belongs within some of these spaces. And some of these shifts don't have to be massive. A lot of it is little tweaks. Obviously, some massive shifts could support as well, but it can be as simple as meeting people where they're at. Let's say somebody's coming from a traditional scientific background, maybe in academia, just understanding that that's their foundation, and then creating a better flow for, okay, you're used to operating in this type of way, maybe with these types of hierarchies or interacting with other labs in this manner. Now you have the opportunity to really claim the space that you want to claim and pursue the research you're interested in through some of these DeSci labs and different communities that exist. And so I think that really meeting people where they're at is the underlying kind of foundation to being able to create better onboarding pathways and ultimately belonging.
Do you have any particular examples you've noticed through your studies of DAOs and in particular science DAOs of any best practices or mistakes that are made? You know, any concrete examples of either these minor or major shifts that may need to happen to have a more diverse, equitable, and inclusive space? Absolutely.
I think one glaring platform kind of at the intersection of some of these challenges is Discord. Like, it's a fantastic way to communicate, to connect, to create different guilds or different projects and just have those teams be able to meet effectively. However, if somebody is downloading Discord for the very first time, they get thrown in here and they might have come across the DAO or the organization that owns that Discord. They might have no further context beyond that. One, navigating the space, and two, understanding what's that first step of how I should actually contribute or get involved. So really providing a little bit more context as to what somebody is stepping into when entering some of these different technologies, whether it's Discord, whether it's creating a wallet for the first time, and what that looks like or why that matters. That's obviously expanded beyond the DeSci space as well, but I think DeSci is kind of uniquely positioned in the sense that a lot of folks that might be coming in may not have a purely technological background, whereas other DAOs might attract more people that have that technological background and might have just more exposure to some of these technologies previously, whereas in this space, a little bit more support and guidance along the way could do wonders.
So even perhaps on the website, you know, where near the button where it says join Discord, maybe instead having like two separate buttons that's like, first time on Discord, click this first. And then, you know, describing in documentation what's going to happen, what you need to do first so that you don't get blocked by the verification bots for being too new. So do you feel, so like, you know, just having more extensive documentation, acknowledging that people coming in might be using things like Discord for the first time, do you think that's enough? Or do you think that there's something inherently non-ideal about Discord that we'll have to face at some point?
I think how DAOs and communities are engaging with Discord is continuing to be discovered and explored. So I don't know if there's inherently a flaw with different technologies, but rather in how it's being used and for what communities it serves. With that said, if there are other platforms that scientists are used to communicating and convening on, maybe that's actually where DeSci should live, or maybe a platform that resembles the spaces that they're used to operating in. Going back to your point about kind of having that context on the website, I think also positioning some of that context in different types of ways for each person's preferences. So some people prefer video, other people prefer an onboarding call, other folks just want to read through a quick like white paper and then they're good to go, they can dive in. And as we're looking at the Web3 space in general, it's very oriented towards the people who feel and have the psychological safety to jump into projects and really claim like, oh, I'm going to go make this new initiative happen. And through just how traditional science has pushed down certain types of people, some folks may not have as much of a foundation to feel they can jump in to that type of level. So just recognizing different onboarding approaches for different types of scientists as well.
That's excellent. And it looks like we do have a couple questions in the chat, in the last 2 minutes or so. And I think, Erin, I think we can just keep going because I think I think that this is a question I would like to ask you. So this is a question from Shadi saying, how can we improve on existing scientific training and mentorship programs with distributed research networks and using Web3 technology? So I think this basically means, what do you think DeSci can do in the context of scientific training and mentorship specifically? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, just due to the decentralized nature of DeSci, different early career scientists can have the opportunity to engage with mentors or other training opportunities that on a global scale. Whereas before, all of those different labs and opportunities weren't quite as connected. So I think there's a massive opportunity for that to happen here.
Right. And that goes back to what Talissa was saying about the beauty of, asynchronous global communication. And I think as technology progresses, we already have translation technologies, for a lot of languages where you can send a message in your language and it gets received by the other person in another language. So there's a lot of potential here. All right, I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining us. And I would like to just leave everyone with the message that if you are interested in what Web3 Women in Science is trying to do with bringing more diversity, especially gender diversity, to the DeSci space, anyone is welcome to join our server, our Telegram, our events. This is not a women-only group. Some of our most avid contributors are men who just really believe in the mission of recruiting a more diverse population to DeSci. So please feel free to come in. Please feel free to talk about your organization if you're interested in recruiting more women to your organization. And thank you again, ResearchHub, for having us.